Oh, can you guys hear us okay? Okay. There we go.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Freedom Park Conservancy's second public input meeting. My name is Harriet Lane, Chair of the Conservancy. We are glad you're here. We still have attendees entering the meeting, so I'll just wait a couple of minutes and then we'll get started. Again, welcome to Freedom Park Conservancy's second public input meeting. My name is Harriet Lane. I'm the board chair of the Conservancy. We're so glad that you're here. We're also streaming Facebook Live. Community is really important, and Freedom Park Conservancy believes that engagement begins with people who decide to learn together. Become more committed and become better able to support the well-being of our communities through collaborative work involving a diversity of stakeholders. So please visit our website at freedompark.org and click Master Plan to keep up with any updates and our future meeting. Before moving into the meeting, I'd like to introduce you to a few people on the steering committee that are here tonight. David Hamilton is the master plan coordinator. David Blakely is also a past president of the Freedom Park Conservancy and landscape architect. We have Nancy Boyd, vice president and art chair of the Conservancy. And Michael Reeves, Old Fourth Ward representative and board director. Thank you so much. And now I'm really excited to introduce Ed Cadell and Jen Price. They are public involvement experts with Sycamore Consulting, and they'll take it from here.
All right, thank you, Harriet. Before we get started, I just want to let everyone know that we are recording this session. You can submit a question at any time during the presentation using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get to all of these questions at the end of the presentation. In the meantime, we do welcome you to, we've left the chat feature open. This is kind of an informal way to comment and to communicate with us and with each other. And this is going to be off the record. We will take your comments and things into consideration, but this will not be published as part of any official record. Also, throughout the presentation, we're going to be polling pretty often to gauge your interest and opinions on a range of ideas. These polls will pop up as a separate window on your screen, so you should be able to view the presentation and the poll at the same time. So just to recap, at our first public meeting, we presented and solicited feedback on some big ideas and themes. And in the past several weeks, we've been reviewing your input and kind of hashing out these big ideas. In terms of where we are in the process, in the master planning process, we are about halfway through. Our next steps involve meeting with key stakeholders, key neighborhood groups, and finally really digging into the drafting process, drafting the master plan itself. So without further ado, I will turn it over to the consultant firm who's in charge of crafting this master plan, SWA. Natalia, Scott, and Kinder are with us. Natalia and Scott are in one place and Kinder is in another place. And I will turn it over to them to discuss what they've been working on so far.
Thank you, Ed. Okay, well, tonight we have a lot to cover. We have about an hour here. So as Ed mentioned, the first public meeting, we went through our analysis of the park and our bits of our analysis that are ongoing. And we talked about some preliminary themes and kind of simplified it and kind of thought about it in terms of planning, mobility, ecology, programming, and identity, and shared some of those initial thoughts with you and got some preliminary feedback. We extended that process, as I mentioned, also into the website and did some survey results, and we're covering a number of topics to really gauge people's opinions, gain some insights into the park as it exists and how it's used, and really start to understand people's priorities. Some of the things that started to come out of that, I mean, we can't go into all that right now with all the information is available on the website, but just some general questions. How do you currently use Freedom Park? Well, obviously it really depends on the people, but there's some consistent themes. A lot of it had to do with scenic views, really, getting immersed in nature, a little bit away from the city, things you would expect in a park environment, but also, some specific things, yoga and other, the art obviously is a big component. But then we also asked, what would you like to be able to do in the park that you currently is not offered? And I think this is where it starts getting interesting. Organized recreation, large stationary events, someone said adventure courses or zip lining, there's a lot of things I think people yearn for in any park environment, some of which may be appropriate, some of them may not be. So we're going to test that a little bit as we go through stuff today. And then also just thinking, what are the concerns about a park? Well, obviously this park has, as we all know, really major infrastructure that goes through in terms of roadways. And that's actually the legacy of why the park was created to begin with, in terms of what's not there. The highways are not there, but these roads are. And so safety and mobility become important, and how people interact and navigate through a park that does have so much roadways. And also thinking about maintenance, in terms of landscape maintenance, that becomes really important, and that can really change people's attitudes about it. And so that's something we need to really think carefully about in terms of what we propose, but also just thinking about the structure of how this park is developed over time, its funding and so forth. And how do you move through the park? Is it relatively easy and safe if you stay on the main trails, as a lot of people noted, but there are a lot of dangerous intersections, or busy intersections, we should say, maybe a couple dangerous conditions. And those are high points that we want to address, and we'll talk about those today as well. And we started mapping some of these points, or actually you all did as well, on the plan on the website. And you see, by the size of these circles kind of talks about how many people tended to point out the same thing. And as you'd expect, some of the high points of major intersections and so forth started to really come to the highlight, as well as some of, think about how it has to do with the, again, these major intersections at Moreland, Beltline, crossings at Boulevard and so forth, but also some of the smaller neighborhood connections, which a lot of you use if you live a little closer to the park. And then thinking also about, where would you take a visitor? What are you most proud of this park when people come to the city? The beautiful views of downtown at Jackson Street and its connection to the King Center, certainly the interface with the Beltline, and Little 5 Points and what it has to offer, and the far end of Candler Park. So all of these spaces, and certainly the Carter Center in the middle was actually a major one that got a lot of attention as well. And so these are the assets of the park that we need to think about, and we'll get into that as well. We were just talking about the words people use to describe the park: peaceful, green, connected, community, but also words like underutilized, urban, underused. So there's a little bit of both going on. Some people appreciate what it is, but they also yearn for what it could be, and what their needs are. When you think about just some of the direct quotes we heard from people, they love the location, how it connects. They love the rolling topography and the open space. And I think that idea of this place that people can be immersed in, that gives them a little respite from the larger sort of frenetic energy of the city is something we want to acknowledge and maintain and enhance through this master plan. And it really kind of comes down to sort of three basic ideas, if we really take it simply. It's a natural respite. There's a civic link. We talked a lot in our last meeting about some of the historic storylines that underlie this park. And also as an art space, this park is designated by the city as an art park. And there's a lot of beautiful pieces. There's more being programmed right now, but we think there's even greater potential to elevate that. And we'll talk a little about that tonight as well. If you take the ideas that we heard, this is just the words of the community here, of you guys, and start to map it out on the plan. You can start to see the location specific. This is extremely helpful information for us. Even we're saturated ourselves in the park. We know the park, all the board members know the park, but hearing it from everyday users, different perspectives becomes really critical. And if you start connecting those dots and giving shape to those spaces and those comments, you actually see a master plan emerging. This is, without benefit of us drawing a single line, this is just what we're hearing from you. And so that's what this process is about. We want to take what you are telling us and we want to take what we're seeing and merge those ideas to create something, hopefully it's wonderful and the community can be quite proud of and really invigorate the experiences within the park. So with that, we're going to divide this up into sort of two segments. We're going to try to go quickly because we have a lot to cover. We're leaving room for feedback, and Ed's going to help sort of navigate that. But the first one's going to be talking about just emerging themes, goals, and ideas, kind of big overarching ideas for the park. We're going to test some ideas with you all. And then we're going to get a little bit more detail. My partner, Kinder Baumgartner, is going to get into a little more detail about some of the programming ideas of the park and kind of testing the range and the attitudes about how much is enough, or what's not enough, and how much is too much. So we'll get into that. But first, we're going to start with these emerging themes. And when we think about it, this is about testing the possibilities, right? And so we've kind of identified 7, I guess you could say, goals for the park. And they range on this kind of spectrum from local issues to almost how you might perceive the park if you were a visitor from outside Atlanta, or even how you might perceive it internationally. We think the park has storylines that are certainly significant on all those levels. And as we kind of go through this, we're going to explain each one, and we're going to, as we go past each one, we're going to ask for some real-time feedback. And it's not a thumbs up or thumb down. It's more sort of gauging whether or not you strongly agree with it, or you're not quite sure, or maybe we need to think about it a bit more as we go through it. So with that, look into the first one here. And this is something that you all know better than anybody, that this park has this incredible storylines and this context within it that we think is of national significance. That this park, if we highlight these themes, can really sort of help to give it inform sort of the programming in it, but also sort of elevate it to this larger conversation. The park is defined by these really beautiful, historic, interesting neighborhoods that are all a little bit diverse as they surround the community. The park is rooted in civic activism, stemming from the very origins of the park as the protests against the plans to build a superhighway through a neighborhood, and how that was able to be removed and scaled back dramatically to preserve and create just the property of this park, but also of the civic leaders and national leaders that occupy places in this park. The Martin Luther King Center, the Carter Presidential Center, John Lewis Parkway, and the memorial or art piece that's in the park. There's a national historical conversation that relates to Atlanta as a city that's extremely important, for our country, but also, this is the site of the Battle of Atlanta was fought and occupied the highlands of this area. All these lines are stories that can be told that we think are worth telling and worth reminding people of. Atlanta is a city known for its greenery. It's this urban forest. It's really well maintained, advocated for an expanding urban forest. And this park can play a really major role in understanding that and enhancing that. And of course, public art, as I mentioned, this is an art park. And the question is, how far can we take that? So if we think about the park as a whole, And we think about this almost as a transect, whether it be from downtown, from the west to the east or north to south. When we think about all these different themes, I think there's opportunities to highlight and really expand on these ideas and think about them opportunistically as you kind of move through in the specific location. So you might take an idea like art and infrastructure. You know, here's the ice bridge, as we call it, that elevates over the highway, as seen from the skate park if you were kind of exiting out of the Beltline interface in Freedom Park. And how could maybe something like that be enhanced or become part of this larger art conversation, or even be thinking about it almost like a branding element for the park? If you move through the park into the trails and you come across locations that are specific, how can we start telling stories, whether it be through art or through signage, about some of these complexities of the stories of the neighborhoods, of the people behind here, of the history of the park, the history of Atlanta, or even current events, and how, you know, art can be a major component of that. Think of nature and habitat and this idea of immersion. And we're going to get into this in more detail, but just generally this idea of enhancing and really amplifying nature as it exists in the park, and thinking about how people can interact with it, not just viewed from afar, but really getting down close to it. So just real quickly, we're going to test this out here. Just this idea, this sort of transect idea about highlighting some of these major themes. Is something that you all feel interested in? And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to always pick number 5 because we wrote this, and we'll remove ours. I have to hit something here, but you all pick something and just generally tell us what you kind of feel about it. We're headed in the right direction on this, and Ed's going to cut us off in just a few seconds. So we got to move quickly. We got a lot of questions for everybody.
Yeah, I'll give kind of a 5-second warning. And this is the 5-second warning. All right. Okay.
Okay, so pretty balanced. A lot of people liked it. Maybe some people had some questions, and you know, so I think these are all good. And so what's key to this is we're getting this feedback, but this is also about feeding you all ideas about just how we're thinking about the park and the master plan, this transparency. And we all encourage you to go on to the website and give us more detail about your thoughts about this, whether it be about specific themes or any other ideas of the park. That's going to be the feedback that's really going to help shape this master plan. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Natalia. She's going to take the next couple points.
Okay, let's talk about the second idea. Highlight local, national, and international civic role of the park. Another extraordinary reality of the park is how it is connected to the 3 giants of American history: Martin Luther King Jr., Jimmy Carter, and John Lewis. Right next to the park, there are 2 international centers dedicated to King and Carter, of course, both Nobel Peace Prize laureates. And John Lewis, the beloved Atlanta citizen and civil rights leader, also has a dedicated precinct within the park. To tell the story of Atlanta as a cradle of civil rights movement and human rights advocacy is to tell the story of the 3 individuals well. What if we could tell this story by linking the 3 dedicated sites with an idea of a procession? Freedom Park starts at Jackson Street in Sweet Auburn, with lots of folks coming to the bridge to have their picture taken with a view of downtown. What if we reimagined the intersection of Jackson and Kane, a small side street, as a regional gateway to the park and to the civic processional experience? This could be a gathering place used for celebrations, fall festivals, complete with food trucks and seating. It would launch you to the King Center via ceremonial alley of trees and towards the Carter Presidential Center along John Lewis Parkway. Since John Lewis's passing earlier this year, there has been talk about potential ways of commemorating him in the city. How could we make John Lewis Parkway into a signature boulevard worthy of this man's legacy? In February, right around the time of his birth, the boulevard could be in bloom celebrating his life and achievements. With Atlanta Marathon that also happens right around that time, one could imagine temporarily closing the road and creating a running procession through the blossoming LA. Protests, marches could be set in the corridor to bring even more weight to the space bearing the legacy of civil disobedience and the grassroots movement that opposed the construction of the freeway and made the park possible in the first place. The boulevard procession would terminate in John Lewis Plaza in Quincy Highland neighborhood. The beautiful sculpture by Thornton Dial already adorns the plaza, but we believe the setting could be much grander. What if the low valley in front of the sculpture would become a reflection pond? both serving as a performative green infrastructure for stormwater treatment and a reflective surface that elevates the civic importance of the site of the park. So what do you think of this approach? How important is it to link the 3 civic sites in the park and develop celebratory places and landscapes at Jackson Street Gateway, near King Center, along John Lewis Parkway, and at John Lewis Plaza?
Five more seconds.
Okay,
A lot of support.
yeah.
Idea number 3. As we all know, Freedom Park is a designated art park by the City of Atlanta, and according to the feedback we got today, the majority of you seem to think this is a great feature and opportunity for the park to bring the community together around art. But what does that really mean? Here is a map of the world with just a few famous art parks shown. When we look at those parks and how they relate to their context, we begin to think that Freedom Park is very well positioned to become a unique international art space. It is definitely not a matter of size. As you can see, the scale of Freedom Park is very appropriate to be in the company of all these other art parks and sculpture gardens, drawing visitors from all around the world. In fact, the shape of the park lends itself very well to become an outdoor museum of sorts. Just like a museum, the park has distinct wings that can start to be thematically very interesting and different from one another. So why don't we take a tour wing by wing? In the West Wing, the roadside condition dominates. Movement happens at different speeds, and that dynamic energy is further emphasized by the interface with the Beltline. Art that could embrace the theme of movement corridor could be very linear. It could be integrated with freeway infrastructure and bridges, and also start creating gateway experience at the scale that does not get lost at high speeds. In the North Wing at Ponce Highland, park gets wider. Topography opens up and connections to the community are very apparent. What if this could tell a social civic art story? Between John Lewis Plaza sculpture, Hami plans a future installation, Atlanta could keep the narrative of an international city in the North Wing of the park. In the South Wing at Inman Park, the 3 topographical terraces cascade down from the Carter Center and form into beautiful gallery rooms. The neighborhood is filled with amazing remnants of old homes, Civil War battleground, and this historic context could begin to define the character of the art experience. Memories of Atlantans, past and present, could form dialogues about Atlanta's future. In the East, park opens up into a bucolic setting of rolling lawns and open sky. Landforms are big, and there are great opportunities for long views. Art here can highlight natural systems, be ephemeral, hidden in the forest, or celebrate landforms themselves as powerful artistic statements. So what do you think of this idea, setting up unique gallery programs for the park's 4 wings?
All right, 5 second warning.
Okay, good responses. Yes, and a little bit of a mix. A couple people may have had some issues. It's hard to, so again, put your comments, send us your comments more specifically if you can think of anything to write down, the things you want us to look at a little more carefully. We're gonna move on to the next one. It's about mobility. This is a big topic within the park, and as we talked about, one that was brought up quite a bit in a lot of the survey comments we had. And mobility issues, there's a strong infrastructure for mobility, whether it be the trails that already exist, as well as certainly the roadways. But there's also a lot of challenges in terms of crossings and interconnectivity, particularly to places like the Carter Center, which was also highlighted as one of these important destinations. So we can't cover all of those issues, but we're going to pick a couple of key ones that were brought up by the comments. So we'll, as sort of examples of how we might go about tackling some of these issues. So we'll talk about Boulevard, the intersection of Boulevard at Freedom Park, at Freedom Parkway at the Carter Presidential Center, and Moreland at Freedom Park. So representing sort of the three ends along this transect. And I think when you start, the first idea would be to kind of zoom out and really think about this park in context. You know, we've got downtown and we've got destinations in the city that are outside of the park. Emory University, other sort of assets that are in and around. And this park is part of a mobility infrastructure that is not just happening within this park, but happening through the park as well. If we want people to use this park and feel comfortable using it as maybe an alternative to driving, or to move across from one neighborhood to another. And so these points are really important. And so if you think about a place like the Carter Center, which you can probably imagine is this center here in the middle, you could think about maybe there's a mobility strategy that really deals with that juncture, that sort of island in the center, and really starts to orient people and help with the legibility and establish a hierarchy of movement within the park. That's part of the idea. But looking more specifically at some of the conditions, we're going to look here at Freedom Parkway at Boulevard. Boulevard's a very busy street. It occupies sort of an important juncture on the western end of the park, and really a gateway to the park. It's also one that's not particularly pedestrian friendly. It is signalized, but you can see in the image on the left these right-hand turn movements that are allowed. Those allow cars to turn without having to stop for pedestrians. In the same way that a traffic signal would. So in order to, if we were going to say that we wanted to privilege pedestrians or really promote pedestrian connectivity, we might start by saying, well, we want to get rid of those. We still allow the cars to stop and do their turn movements. Maybe we have to adjust the traffic signal timing and so forth, so we don't slow down cars too much. But this is a park, and this is a place within a park. This is not the right of way of this roadway is essentially, however you define it, part of Freedom Park. So we have to think of it like that. It also extends further than that, though. Maybe we create a space here. You can see on the image on the right, and these are very crude sketches, but you get the idea that, maybe there's broader pedestrians and people spaces with a singular identity that establishes this gateway, allows for more queuing. Also starts to think about what's happening at the four corners of this important intersection. We've got a new dog park that opened up. We have a new mixed use center that's been there for a few years, very successful, something to build on. There's certainly the gateway that Natalia was just talking about to the MLK Center just off in the lower portion of the screen. And then there's mid-rise, mid-density, higher density residential community just off on the other corner. So all of these things are destinations in their own right for a number of different people for different reasons. And places like this is important to increase mobility and really privilege these movements and basically slow down traffic. So that's a common theme we're going to have in this park. We can go to the Carter Presidential Center in that area, and maybe we take it a step further. We said the Carter Presidential Center is a destination, but it's very difficult to get to. In fact, the road's occupied on all four sides. There's very few crossing points. And because of the road geometries and some of the topography, sometimes there's not very good sight lines between cars and pedestrians. So what if we said, just as a general statement, we wanted to really try to consolidate vehicular infrastructure to open up gateway opportunities into the park and increase connectivity, not just to the Carter Center, but also to other portions of the park. Maybe in the process of that, we might free up land for other opportunities as well that might extend to some programming opportunities that we're going to talk to in a moment. So you can see in the after image here, we've taken away half the road and we've combined it with other roads that already exist in a very efficient, tight condition. And if you just look at the interconnectedness of the green space, regardless of ownership, we know the Carter Center is a separate entity, but it really establishes some great opportunities. And if you get on the ground and look at that, you see the before image here with the Carter Center to your right. And then if you go to the right-hand image, the road's gone, obviously, there's a number of possibilities that open up, not the least of which is that pedestrians, bicyclists, park goers can have free movement in all sorts of opportunities. We could even think about sort of how we start to frame downtown in the distance, Atlanta's beautiful skyline from a location like this, and really start to utilize these topographic and undulating landforms to create new experiences. And then finally, moving all the way to the far eastern side of the park, up at Moreland, another important intersection, another busy intersection. In this case, it's a T. with Freedom Parkway sort of dying into Moreland. But with Candler Park sort of as a destination, there's schools down at the far eastern end, or a school, I should say, an important elementary school. And so thinking about users and how people move around, you know, maybe more kids would be riding their bike to school if they had a safer way to cross. And there's a lot of different ways we can think about what is a safe crossing and how do you privilege pedestrians. It could be about traffic timing and longer traffic signals. It could be about widening pedestrian crosswalks. It could be about creating like we said also in the earlier slide, of creating more of a space, a gateway with more generous places for people to congregate, and a strong identity as a gateway itself. It could even be, as much as which has been brought up in the past, the idea of creating a very simple pedestrian bridge. We know that this is controversial. We also know that this would have to be done very carefully if proposed in a way that would be not opposed to what the sensitivities are of the surrounding community. But it would be a very strong statement to say that I could move from one end of Freedom Park all the way to the other and not have to stop for vehicles along the way, for cars at intersections. And it might open up opportunities to other sorts of users. So we think it's an idea worth at least exploring. So what do you all think of these? If we prioritize mobility, these major crossings, we have to start deep conversations with public agencies. Is this something that we should be pursuing? Are these sort of high level important components to a successful future for Freedom Park?
We knew the mention of the bridge would get people voting. That's the 5-second warning here.
All right. Yeah, and as expected, a lot of support, a lot of people bringing up some concerns, perhaps. So again, comments will be important for us to sort of really kind of dig deeper into some of those issues. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about is ecology and the value of nature in the park. The park, as it exists today, is beautiful, really incredible specimen trees, very green. It is also, if you looked at it more critically, potentially a little bit more of a monoculture. Its contribution from sort of urban ecological standpoint is limited in the extent that it's mostly mowed turf and trees. That's not a bad thing in terms of certain types of use, but if we were going to say, well, maybe the park has the ability to, or really needs to, or should begin to diversify the ecology, how would we go about doing that? Well, you could start by looking at the topography of the land and sort of what we're calling these rooms, these spaces where we have a little bit more people space, a little bit more nature space, and thinking about how that relates to elevation. And maybe there's areas for water and more areas in the fringes for meadows and other types of ecology, more complex ecology. And so as you move through the park, you might begin to introduce concepts of what we call blue-green infrastructure, you know, plants and water and interactions of such that also support other functions like the cleaning of stormwater and collecting of stormwater, pollinator corridors. How can microhabitats be created opportunistically where we have sun pockets for wildflowers or other types of plantings? Understory forest habitat, where we have forests, we have these trees. Do we take some areas and allow for this middle story, these understory to develop? It's a little bit more sympathetic to other smaller types of plants and animals to come together. And also this overstory, this idea of the larger connected canopy. How do we make sure that that is connected and again support the habitat for birds and squirrels and all sorts of things that live above us as well, creating this interconnected landscape. So what do you guys think of this idea? Establishing a landscape program that increases biodiversity and habitat value in the park. This is something that we want to commit some level of resources towards identifying and find opportunities to stitch into this larger master plan effort.
All All right, a few more seconds.
Okay, a little bit more consistent here. A lot of supporters. We're going to go towards the next one. And this is about the neighborhoods. We talked about the importance and the significance of the communities that surround this, the neighborhoods that many of you, I'm sure, live in. And you will know what those assets these communities have. We have the King Center, we have the Beltline, Little 5 Points, the Olmsted Parks to the far east. These are all sort of community assets, but extends beyond that. There are also businesses, whether it be shops and restaurants and so forth, that work within this. And so we need to think about how a park like this can reach out and leverage these assets these communities can bring to park goers, and how the park can actually return that favor and support these businesses and these communities that surround it. So we might think of the park, as you move through it, as beginning to think about how you move about into these surrounding communities, these little loops maybe that get developed that bring you out and start to stitch together some of these high points or these important locations within the community. We might have the Beltline loop that uses a piece of the Beltline, takes you up to Ponce Market and back through the park, or a little 5 Points loop, or maybe a loop over by the Martin Luther King Center, or maybe a garden loop that takes you up through Candler Park and back through these beautiful historic green neighborhoods along the Olmsted Parks. Each one of these would be predicated on the idea of creating a sort of a system of identity and signage that would point you to these locations, but also, if you're outside of the park, point you back to the park as well, and start to that dialogue and that exchange. So what do you think of this idea? We're going to develop Freedom Park as a district, not just thinking about the park itself, but really thinking about these communities and maybe these loops and how they interact with the park. Is that appropriate? Is that to think about these communities as integral to the foundations of how this park functions?
A few more seconds.
Okay, yeah. Again, a lot of support. Maybe some people saying we gotta look into a little more carefully on some of these topics. We're gonna move on to the last of our 7. Oops. There we go.
Okay. Well, and the final topic we wanted to touch on today is economics of the park. The future possibilities we've been discussing today, they're super exciting, at least to us, but it all costs money at the end of the day. And all parks need to be able to raise money or rely on public dollars for construction, operations, and maintenance. There are 2 important components that can build momentum for economic viability of the park: a cohesive brand identity and shared experiences that people can identify with and enjoy. We all want to be a part of something beautiful, interesting, successful, and fun, and by extension contribute to that. Currently, the brand identity of the park is not very clear. It blends with the city, and other brands bleed into the Freedom Park. Entrances hardly mark an arrival, and navigation in the park sometimes can be quite confusing. What we'll be looking at here is 2 things. On the one hand, strengthening the unique standing of the park as a place, so people can know how to enter it. So here in the circles, you kind of see major gateways into the park. And that's how they would want to visit it, as a destination, through those portals and gateways. And on the other hand, exploring the possibilities for park environments that can form those new shared experiences that I already mentioned. So let's talk about branding for a bit. What makes up a brand of the park? First of all, its values and personality, and graphic expression that tries to capture that personality. Words like empowering, civic-minded, engaging, conversational, high design, literally, inspirational, edgy, hip, and young. They're all inspirational words that have been used in relation to the park and reflective how community identifies with the park or wants to identify with the park. Let's think how branding can also be derived from the essence of the park and inform design. The park is very much about movement, and we think that's great. So but right now, what we have, to support movement is very singular experience of a path. If we started truly celebrating movement, the path could potentially get a lot more interesting. We could think about path hierarchy, secondary paths for slower moving visitors, textured paths for a different sensation on your feet, lighted paths, and unique striping like yellow brick road for both safety and navigation. Branded wayfinding would work with what is already in the park. The low walls that mark entrances already exist, and we could definitely work with those, but would expand on that family to make the entrances and directions to the park more prominent and legible. Repetition and consistency is key here, if this is to support a cohesive brand over a large area of the city. We can go even further and think about branded Freedom Park furniture. What if we get inspired by all the education the park can offer about nature, history, and art, and the furniture could literally support the idea of outdoor classroom and be inspired by the old elementary school desks we all used as children? You could make smart furniture by embedding charging stations and providing Wi-Fi, tracking availability of seating spots in the park, and letting people download and listen to the park stories. These little chairs could come in branded colors and be rearranged according to the character of each wing of the park, thus also supporting its brand. This is a tangible, easy way to infuse in just an example. This is not a design proposal. This is just an example how this kind of a branding exercise could be handled. And this could infuse the park's identity with a very exciting moment. And this is also an example of a new shared experience. And in a minute, my colleagues will expand on the topic of other potential shared activities in the park. But for now, what do you think of the idea of reinforcing brand identity via cohesive design and new shared experiences?
All right, 5-second warning.
Okay, great. So we'll mixed reviews on that one. that was a little bit more specific, so that's to be expected. Okay, so we're going to change gears here a little bit and talk a little bit now about programming. What is there to do in the park? And my colleague Kinder Baumgartner is going to walk us through that. And I'm just going to give you a quick overview. When we think about the park as the sort of nexus in Atlanta, it's dealing with, what was all the exciting things about the city of Atlanta. We think this park is expressive of a lot of those themes, but also thinking about what Atlanta will be in the future and what's important in these, or the growth of the city. We talked about all these different words and themes that people use to describe the park itself. Now, how do these translate into what people can do and what experiences they can have?
So, we actually asked you a lot of questions via the website about future activities in the park and what you want to see happen that's not currently offered potentially. And what's really interesting, culture and nature emerged as really primary themes that people wanted to have program dedicated for. And culture constitutes a lot of things. It's not just art, it's also history, interpretation, civic activities and nature of the park. Nature, we can think about gardens, green infrastructure, some of the ecological functions that we talked about earlier today. Leisure is, more passive recreation. You can think about picnicking and sitting and strolling and food. As far as play is concerned, there are a couple of play offerings in the park right now, but a lot of people mentioned potentially expanding those offerings throughout. Recreation didn't come on top, but still a lot of, because of all of the running and walking associated with the park, a few exercise stations potentials were mentioned, maybe some, flexible fields where you could, go out with your family and kick ball. So things like that were very revealing and very helpful in formulating our approach to this future programs of the park.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kinder, and he's going to walk us through some ideas about programming and and levels of intensity of programming.
Okay. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay. So, yeah, so what we want to do is kind of get into a little detail here about kind of understanding how people want to see enhancements happen in the park and things that people might want to do in the park or see others doing in the park. But I do want to, so in the purpose of this is that it's not to vote a park. The idea, like if you look at these three things that are on the screen now, it's not, we're not voting on, do I like logs or do I like chromium colored balloons, right? That's not what we're voting on. And I want to be careful with all of this polling. The idea is not to vote a park. The idea is to understand the themes that you guys respond well to and the themes that you don't respond well to. That's equally important. It is extremely important that we then kind of use this information to help guide us as we plan and design the park going forward. So the way this little next piece works is that from left to right, think of it as a slider from least intense to most intense, right? And they're all going to work this way. And so if there's not going to be a button where you can say, I hate all these ideas. There's not going to be a button where you can say, I love all of these ideas. Because the idea is to force you guys to make certain decisions so that we understand them. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to be forced to make certain decisions in order to finish this master plan. So you're kind of joining us into the struggle here. So let's jump in. So the first one, let's talk about it. So art, is we know, is a big important part of the park. We also think that there's maybe an opportunity for temporary art, right? More event kind of focused things. So on the left might be an art feature, very natural, right? It may not almost look like, is that even designed by someone? And as you spend time with it, you start to think that it is. The one next to it, not event focused, but it's more of a spectacle, right? Maybe it's evening lighting. People are kind of drawn to that. And the one on the right says, maybe there's an art event where, you know, there's certain types of temporary art that's brought out. And this could happen once a year, every 2 years, whatever the right amount is. And you can kind of come out and participate in this. So how much is too much? And that's kind of what you're getting to with the 1, 2, or 3.
We will always be voting 2 on this, just to be clear. We will throw out our votes at the end. We have to vote.
All right, a few more seconds, and then for the next series of these, I'm just going to throw the poll up as soon as Kinder starts describing the range of the 3 options. All right.
All right, next, so we're going to get some results. Okay, so kind of in the middle, right? And I guess maybe more of a bias towards the lower impact side. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so then other kinds of performing events, right? So the one on the left says, hey, this is about, we carve little small rooms into the park as you move through, and maybe someone just shows up and wants to do a little, I don't know, play their guitar for the neighbors or something, right? The one in the middle, that gets to be a little more intense, where now it is a small bandstand, decidedly small, so it could only carry a couple of people at a time. Maybe it's something people use on Fridays, who knows? And the one on the right says, no, it's a little bigger, right? We actually want performance art to be a part of this park. And so there's a small amphitheater that you could use in a variety of ways, from a play to all sorts of different things.
All right, a couple more seconds.
Okay, kind of middle to lower key again. Theme emerges, just two in. All right, next. Okay, so other ways to kind of enhance the park is to think about biodiversity and other layers of ecology and habitat that might find its way into the park. So on the left, so what we're saying here is that maybe there needs to be a wetland. There's certainly a lot of opportunity for that to kind of add to the park. Right now it's a lot of trees and grass, beautiful, but it's lacking some of this diversity. The one on the left says, hey, it's a hardcore wetland. It's about bugs and frogs, right? Number 2 says, no, it's a bit more interpretive. There's an educational component to it. Number 3 says, you know what, let's take it a little further. It needs to start to be artful, more playful, absolutely a high functioning wetland, but it starts to have more of this architectural component to it.
All right, a few more seconds on this one.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Everyone's feeling very Goldilocks, right in the middle. Okay, another way to add some diversity, variety to the park would be thinking about a pond, right? Small lake. So number 1, it's a lake or pond, right? It's very simple. It's sculpted out of the natural grade and topography of the park. The edges are natural. Sure, it's great for picnicking, kind of doing more of what you can do today, but there's more view, right? Number 2 says, let's make it a little more city, right? Maybe that some of the edges have are articulated, right? So you can approach it in a different, unique way. And maybe there's things you could do with the water as a kid. Number 3 says, let's take it all the way. I need swan boats, fountains. It's a spectacle. It's a place to go in the evening. And I know I saw someone ask, hey, the poll, when it comes up, it covers the images. So Ed, you might give us a moment longer. One,
yeah, I got you. That might be an issue. If you're using a cell phone, it might crowd out, everything might crowd out together. So yeah, I'll wait until you're done to throw the poll up.
I'll go a little faster too. And then also, if you're on a computer, you can grab the top bar of the poll and slide it off to the right. Okay, keep it simple. Okay, next slide. So the same sort of thing that we talked about with wetlands and ponds, there's another thing that we have. We have beautiful big trees, but they don't really add up to like a biodiversity where you might call a forest, right? And maybe there should be moments, not all of the park, but certain moments that you craft into something that feels more like a forest. So on the left, it's very much about nature. Number 2 says, but we want people to come into it. So there's some cultural elements, boardwalks, maybe some interpretive exhibits. And number 3 says, you know what? A forest doesn't have to just look like nature. There's also upland type things that can happen along the edges that might be very beautiful, that might start to create a theme, or even almost an event that might draw people to the park at certain times of the year.
All right, a couple more seconds.
Okay, very helpful. Next slide. Okay, let's talk about grass, right? The park has a lot of grass. And we do see an opportunity again with this sort of adding, enhancing and kind of adding variety is, in some areas the mowed grass ought to be a meadow. Number 1 says, yeah, it's a hardcore meadow. We let all these sort of native perennials and grasses come in and they start to do their thing. Of course, very, very, there's a certain way that we make this happen. It can't just be weeds. Number 2 says, well, let's add these cultural elements to it so that we kind of hold the meadow in its place and that view kind of behind these stone walls. So it somehow seems like, oh, that's acceptable because it's over here, but close to me, I have mowed grass. Number 3 says, it's this meadow, but it's highly curated. Some of the plants may be ornamental to add more beauty and variety to them. There's pathways and walkways that move through it. So it starts to become more of a garden. And I see a note from Scott, no stone walls. I do want to remind everyone, the idea here is not that we're looking at the specifics of what you see. You could say, yeah, I like the idea of the curated garden on the right, but I hate the diagonal wood. We're not trying to get to the heart of the diagonal wood or do I like that kind of stone. It's the more of the concept of, you know, how much is too much when it comes to a meadow. How curated versus how natural should that meadow be? Okay, pretty even responses there. Okay, so another item to think about are cultural elements within the park that also start to become a source of revenue. In order for the park to be as successful as it wants to be, there's got to be funding streams, right? And some of that just comes through philanthropic ventures, but also by having the Conservancy lease spaces in the park, suddenly there's money there to do other things. So at the far left says, yeah, we invite food trucks in from time to time. We create a little special food truck garden. We charge them some rent. Number 2 says we take it a little further. We have these really interesting design, small scale kiosks around the park, and it's coffee, drinks, it's lunches, picnic supplies, right? Number 3 says, let's push it. There should be a great world-class restaurant in this park. And we should get the revenues associated with it to make other things in the park be as wonderful as we'd like them to be.
All right, a few more seconds.
Okay, keep it simple. Seating, same thing. At the left, it's kind of very comfy, just kind of hammock type seating that we might hang out in the park. Number 2, you get it a little more formal. Number 3 says, hey, this stuff is really going to be bespoke, custom design stuff, not that exact bench, but the idea that we create something unique for the park. And no, you can't vote no seating. You have to pick one to help us pick it.
Right, a couple more seconds.
Okay, right down the middle, but a lot of, you know, pretty good spread there. Okay, so kids, right? Kids in parks, they go well together. Let's talk about play. So what the left says, play doesn't have to be a traditional play equipment, right? It can be just this cool slide that finds its way into the natural topography of the site somewhere. 2, we can build more traditional play equipment, kind of locate those around the project, but they can also take on kind of a woodsy kind of character to them. And number 3 says we could go all the way. I mean, this could be a world-class play space for kids to come out, for families from across the region to come and use.
I will admit that number 1 does look like a lot of fun.
It absolutely does. I think those are little rollers too that make you go super fast.
All right, a couple more seconds.
Yeah, this is like a slide crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, guys. There's just a couple more. Athletics, same sort of thing. You know, on the left, it says, we want to encourage people to bring their own equipment out and do things. 2 says, we want to encourage people to be really healthy. So we're going to set up little exercise stations around the park. And they can be really cool looking, right? They don't need to just be kind of some old fashioned thing. And 3 says, maybe we need a ropes course. Maybe we need a zip line. Maybe we need something that's a bit more engaging to all different levels and all different kinds of people.
All right, a couple more seconds. 3, 2.
Okay, that's great. All right, thank you guys. That's super helpful to us. And I appreciate you guys, just grabbing a hold of these things and just helping us pick something so we can kind of gauge these themes.
Okay, and again, none of those were set in stone. I saw a couple people wondering, why can't I choose none of the above?
Yeah, let me address that. I mean, again, as I said at the beginning, the goal is to help us make decisions, right? And if the answers to all these are, I don't want anything, it really encumbers the design process, because we know that the ideas for things to happen in the master plan. There's been a great outpouring of support for that. So what we're trying to do is get you guys to kind of help us push certain themes, right? And you could read from those. Yeah, there's certain ideals that I think the group that's participating tonight has. You can start to read those. And that's extremely helpful to me to kind of understand the general themes that people are interested in.
All right, so we're gonna kind of move on very briefly, and we're gonna try and get to all your questions as well. We just have a couple of announcements. We are in the process of updating the social engagement website, but our big announcement is that we are holding a photo contest. We invite you to share with us your best photos of Freedom Park, and you'll be entered for a chance to win one of these awesome limited edition Freedom Park t-shirts. I think we're giving away 5 of them. So the steps to enter: first, you'll need to follow us on Instagram at Freedom Park _ATL. Then we ask that your beautiful photo be shared with the hashtag Freedom is your Park. We also, kind of in a shameless promotional plug, ask that you tag some of your friends, with the caveat being the more tags, the more chances you have to win. And if you want even more extra credit, share it in your story. And we will be announcing that in the next several weeks. We have also updated our interactive map. So I'm just going to briefly show you the new interactive map. It mainly focuses on, once it loads, focuses on programming. So the 5 different buckets of curated culture, nature, leisure, play, and recreation that we spoke about during the presentation today. You're able to choose one of those, and if there's a place in the park that you'd like to see a little more curated programming, you're welcome to click and drag one of these, and it will allow you to give a little bit more details. You can also leave a photo, and let us know, like, kind of what are you thinking about in terms of programming. We do have in the About section a little bit of a detailed explanation of what we mean, and we'll be putting up a couple more of these helpful graphics as well, to help guide this process. And finally, within the next, probably by early next week, we are going to launch a new survey that is going to be based on what you have seen here at the presentation. We'll kind of give an explanation and ask your preference, and ask for more specific comments as well. So be on the lookout for that in the next couple of days. And I believe with that, we will, let me stop sharing my screen here. Stop share, there we go. We will turn to some of your questions. I believe that everyone has access to read the questions. So we'll start with the first one, a very important one from Regina, who states that the relationship between former President Carter is pretty complicated and controversial. And she asks if all of the consultants are aware of the history regarding the Carter Center and former President Carter and the neighborhoods. Maybe someone from the board or from SWA, either.
Well, maybe SWA will start and the board can fill in. But yes, we've met with representatives from the Carter Center, but also we've talked with the Conservancy, and we understand the complexities of that relationship, how it developed over time. I think there's nuances to that we're still learning, and certainly the board is trying to fill us in as we go. But we also will be continuing conversations with the community that will help shed some more light on that. So yeah, that we recognize that's a really, really critical component.
Okay. The next question from Peter. He is a Ponce Highland resident that spends a lot of time in and around the grounds of the Carter Center. I'm very familiar with the situation that it's a separate entity, but I think they need to be part of this discussion, and you can't treat this critical nexus of the park as a gap. Please plug this hole and let us know their role and how it integrates with the master plan efforts. Great comment. Anyone care to jump in on that?
I don't know. Same from the board. Harriet, do you want to mention that, or do you want me to take that? That's the way.
Yeah, actually, this is David. I'd just like to say that the Carter Center is on the Freedom Park Conservancy board, and they have been talked to extensively. When the design team was in town a few weeks ago, they met with folks from the Carter Center. So yes, the Carter Center is very involved in the master planning process. After all, they are in the middle of the park, as are the neighborhoods. So I don't know if you guys, SWA, want to say anything else?
Yeah, I'll just add that we've tromped all around the Carter Center after talking with them. It's a complex entity in itself. It's got different divisions within it, but I think they share a lot of the same goals that we have. They are actually looking to increase some degree of visitorship onto the site. Certainly the site has incredible potential. We would love to blur that line. We need to respect the logistics and the management and
their own processes.
And their own processes. Yeah, exactly.
They're looking at planning regulating their grounds.
Right. They'll be doing their own master plan that hopefully will be informed by what we're doing and vice versa. So yeah, I mean, it is literally and figuratively central to this whole process, and could unlock many opportunities, but it is its own entity. So we're respectful of that as well.
Thanks, Peter. Regina asks, I believe this was in reference, either Scott or Natalia, you mentioned a successful mixed use building, and she was wondering if you're referring to Freedom Walk, which maybe not the most successful development. Maybe if you could tell us a little bit more what you mean by successful mixed use building.
I think a Condesa, is that the Condesa coffee building?
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about the development adjacent to the or across the street from the dog park location.
Talking about the tribute loss.
Yes, thank you. Tribute loss over Moreland. I'm sorry, Boulevard. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think we don't know all the economics behind that. It was a big deal when it was built, is from what we heard. But I think more importantly, buildings of that typology, I mean, they're driven by economics and other factors that are outside of the scope of this park. But I think what it means to us is that there's a diversity of users, whether it be residential, people who work nearby, different types of features for the park, whether it's food or beverage, that kind of access. And I think in that essence, it is for some people a destination of sorts, and potentially could be more so. And the park could help increase the viability of those sorts of developments. So I think that was the point of bringing up that development, but it was also just to bring up the point of density that's happening at that particular intersection, which could be more so in the future, or maybe just stays kind of as it is.
Thank you, Scott. The next question for the art park component, who is developing the operational or business plan? After 5 years of developing an urban park or an urban art park for a 75-acre site overseas, I learned all too well that without an operational or business plan and funding, it won't be sustainable. So essentially, what is the approach to be used with prioritizing what we want and how much it costs?
So I said maybe we'll start, but I think if
I think Nancy.
Nancy, I don't know if you're online, if you want to talk to this, you can jump in, you can follow me.
I can start if you want, or I can follow.
Sure. Yeah, why don't you start?
Yeah, one of the things that, we're exploring the range of possibilities. Right now, I think we focus more on temporary types of programming, exploring many of the themes that have been explored in the ideas today. And we have specific funding that we have access to and have developed for those types of temporary installations. The more permanent types of installations would be more of a curatorial exercise. The city in the last couple of years went through a process of curation and purchasing and acquisition of 9 different sculptures, permanent sculptures, 3 of which will be in Freedom Park and the rest throughout the city. And that's a relatively new exercise for the city and certainly for Freedom Park. There have been many models that have been floated. One was, for example, I'm trying to think now, I think it was in North Carolina, where the city will commission artwork, sculpture, and then it will be in a park or in a public space for a period of time and then sold. This becomes a revenue stream. But, I think with respect to, there's short term and then there's long term. And it will be it will be incorporating many of the ideas that exist now and many that are more contemporary in nature. And I think what we're trying to do is lay sort of the groundwork for a good range of creative expression. And that can be from sculpture to performance to digital immersive experiences. And we're trying at this stage to certainly be open to that. But I can say from a funding point of view, we're starting to see different funding sources for that full range of ideas. But in terms of one specific model that will be used, no, there's not. Right now, it's making use of the funding sources for the art that exists now, and then following new funding trends that I think, especially with COVID, will be changing as time goes on. Hopefully, sorry if I went on a little bit.
Yeah, just one more comment. Part of the reason we're doing a master plan is to generate interest and have some really exciting and wonderful ideas to show folks who want to donate to the park. And that's part of this process. And we hope to come out of the other end of this with a series of projects to make the park, incredible. So that's the whole point.
And could I add one thing to piggyback with David? Is one of the other key elements to these ideas are partnering well. So the cultural institutions that exist, here in Atlanta, we have many, and we have many that are evolving. Historically, Flux Project has made good use of the park and some of the more interesting installations. But we'd like to expand on those types of relationships in the future as well.
Right, moving on. Paul asks, I think maintaining the integrity of the perimeter of the park is equally as important as the park itself. For the land that is adjacent to the park, land that anyone can purchase and build on, does the Conservancy have any influence with the city on what's allowed to be built alongside the park to ensure that things are consistent and well designed and thoughtful and appropriate to the park itself? Anyone from the Conservancy want to jump in on that?
We asked to review projects that are going up immediately adjacent to the park, and we do give comments, and we have commented on and hopefully improved several of the developments that are right on the park. We did not really have jurisdiction on those projects, but we do ask to be included in the kind of design and review process, and we do communicate our opinions to the city when we're given the opportunity. So there's no formal, like a design review committee that we have of things outside the park, but we do try to stay involved with those. And we do think those are extremely important.
All right. Thank you, David. Regina asks, can't the park have different areas that allow for lower and higher programming? I'm going to go with yes. I'll turn it over to SWA to give a better answer.
No, I'm kidding. Yes, of course. Yeah, I think that's what we're getting at, and I think that's a lot of what this sort of exercise we just went through on the programming. How much is too much? You know, that kind of thing. And where you are in the park, the context is everything in terms of suitability. We've got residences that literally their back doors are right up against the park, and we're very sensitive to that. We have big public spaces. Actually, we don't have, I mean, there's not a lot of like huge volumes of land relative, because this park is drawn out, there's a lot of edges conditions for its overall acreage. So we have to be opportunistic. We have to be very cognizant of the context. But that being said, yes, and I think how you deploy those across it will depend a lot about some of these other organizational attributes we were talking about. We talked about, you know, thinking about the park in terms of galleries or other sort of transects and so forth, and that could inform what kind of uses might go where. And then it's really just attitudes with the city too. I mean, the park is, you know, has certain restrictions on it currently about how many people can even gather at a certain time. And is that something that the community wants to maintain and protect, or is that something that we want to challenge or find maybe instances where we deviate from that and seek out approval to do that? So it's a complicated question, but the short answer is yes.
Okay. Someone has asked, what exactly is the vision statement, and what is the mission and/or the mission statements of this, maybe this new master plan process?
I don't know if anybody from the board wants to talk about it. I mean, I can say just from domestic waste perspective, some of those themes that we talked about in the beginning, these 7 themes, kind of really build into what that might be. I don't know that we've written it specifically.
There is a mission statement.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just don't have it pulled up.
Oh, we do have the mission statement. I'm sorry. Yeah, we don't have it pulled up in front of us. But in general, I think, you know, this idea of creating an inclusive park, inclusive design process, and really be responsive to what the park has to offer, but also what the community's needs and interests are, is fundamental, just like any master plan. And I don't know if the board wants to build on that statement of those ideas. David or anybody?
Yes, completely agree. I don't have the statement in front of us either, but you know, this park was born from civic activism. We place a large value on what our neighbors are having to say, and we're listening. And we want to make sure that we have that information to build on with our community.
And we can definitely get the formalized mission statement and circulate it as well to anyone interested, or to the attendees of the meeting as well. And we have definitely gone over time. If you're happy to stick around, we're happy to stick around and answer the rest of these questions. But if you do need to leave, just wanted to let everyone know that we will be formalizing the Q&A session I'll be typing it up and we'll post it on all of our various websites. So you don't worry about missing out if you do need to get out of here. That being said, moving on, the next question asks if there can be separate paths for bikes and scooters so pedestrians will be safer.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. We've done projects relatively recently that have done just that, had that secondary path system or otherwise really identified the differential in speed and different types of activities that happen on a multi-use trail condition, if you want to call it that. And it's exciting to see lots of people want to use the same trail, but it can cause problems. There's people walking dogs with long leashes, a child learning how to ride a bike, runners, cyclists who want to ride really fast. Some people were just going for a quiet stroll, and that's a lot to ask for a relatively small strip of paving to support all that. So we think that as we sort of kind of move through this master plan, that's a high priority to understand this. We'll call it a hierarchy. It's not just about hierarchy of importance, it's hierarchy of speed and sort of types of use and how that gets integrated.
And I would like to just forward that question directly to the Atlanta Beltline as well. So,
Yeah.
The next question, sorry, go ahead. Did someone else have a?
Yep.
Okay. Next question asks, will Atlanta-based businesses be solicited for funding of specific park areas, such as Home Depot potentially doing an incredible playground, something of the sort? Any thoughts or ideas?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, if this anonymous person is Arthur Blank, we are very interested in talking to you. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, that kind of philanthropy, or however it's termed, or partnerships, is really becoming more and more important to park design throughout the country. Certainly in our work, it's an important tool, and so that goes back to just you know, really elevating the brand and the identity, not so much brand, that's kind of an ugly word, but the sort of the identity of the park, and finding opportunities and being opportunistic with people who have interests in contributing, but also recognizing that the master plan is the voice of people and hard work and priorities, and to not let individuals with resources sort of override that. So I think that's where the board comes into play, to really sort of steer that over time.
Moving on, we've got several. I'm trying to maybe consolidate some of the Moreland Avenue questions into one big question. I'm not doing a great job of it. Scott mentions that everyone wants a safer intersection at Moreland. Some folks want a concrete overpass, and which would involve some bulldozing the park at that site. In terms of mobility, how much is safety focusing on faster and cheaper changes to the intersection, and how much is biker speed, which is lobbying for an overpass? FWA or Freedom Park?
So,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say on that question, what's fundamental to it is safety first, but also I think we use that more as an example of sort of this idea of privileging movement, and the bridge is not about bikers. It's about anybody who's not in a car, essentially. So bikers, but also pedestrians, runners, everything else. And it's sort of the extreme example of that privilege of not having to stop for cars. But like pointed in the question, you know, potentially, if not done very sensitively, it could be a detriment to that near adjacent community, aesthetically or otherwise. We've built, actually, SWA has been involved in a number of pedestrian bridge projects, and we understand the economics behind them and the challenges on how you would work that into a sensitive location like that. So, you know, I think it's something that we take very seriously, and don't, it's not a black and white issue. But I think personally, I think there's potential in the idea, and it's something worth exploring. But I also think if it's not appropriate, then that's something that we don't do. And there's other ways to improve pedestrian privilege, so to speak, in the park, and improve that level of mobility as well.
All right. The next question, which I think you guys touched on a little bit, but it is pretty ambiguous at this point. Terry asks, what is the source of funding for all these wonderful improvements, and what are the timeline and implementation plans? SWA, do you want to jump in?
Well, we can start with this, and if the board wants to jump in.
Or the board.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated, well, it's not complicated. It's a network of funding sources, right? So it's about building partnerships. It's about building identity. Like we said, people need to want to contribute to something that is going to be, they're not running solo on this. In other words, there's multiple groups interested. So funding, can come from philanthropy, through partnerships like the example we just used a moment ago. It can come through partnerships with other agencies, whether it be GDOT or others. It can come from being opportunistic of utility projects that need to happen, that unlock a corner of the park to make an improvement. So when you stitch it back together, it's done in a way that moves you a little bit closer towards that master plan. Businesses, small businesses, community groups, and I think it's the role of the board is really to help navigate that and work with the design team to solicit and create packages that are deployable. It's not an all or nothing sort of project. It can be done strategically over time in sizes and sub projects that are complete in what they produce, but just a fraction of potentially what the overall park is. And then there'll be maybe opportunities for big transformative projects that happen all at once. So I think it's going to be a complex sort of undertaking over time to deploy that. Sometimes, if you build enough interest, you can get enough money pooled together through donors or through public funds or otherwise to do a big project all at once. More often than not, you have to also be strategic and find those smaller opportunities as they present themselves.
Yeah, that's a great answer, of course. And as we develop these ideas, we will develop funding strategies for each one of them. The board will, and we will find people that are interested in those improvements. And it's one fundamental reason we're doing this master plan is so we have a list and persuasive materials to present to potential donors to say, hey, wouldn't you love to do this park entrance or this park feature or this work of public art? So that's a big reason for us doing this master plan, and I think everyone understands that.
Could I add just one more thing to that? Because it's really been I think as we've gone through this process, money and the funding of these ideas is always central, is always on our mind. And this exercise, I think, has helped to inform, what type of event, for example, historically, Piedmont Park, other larger parks, they have a stronger ability to create revenue with events, which we're somewhat limited on. So this exercise that we're going through with SWA has been very fruitful in exploring events, different broader ways in how we could potentially find revenue streams. And then there are, of course, new revenue streams that are being explored, such as social impact bonds. And, there are new types of mechanisms that are for funding large projects of a public nature. And so anyway, the point to add to that is only that these ideas that you evolve, and this process of the master planning is certainly helping us inform us on the range of ideas towards funding.
Thank you, Nancy, and everyone. The next question asks about the kind of the principles of the Olmsted parks, especially maybe linking the Freedom Park idea to the Olmsted parks on Ponce. I'm going to stop reading all of the questions because I think everyone can see them. But what are our thoughts on the original themes and how do they relate to what we're trying to accomplish now?
I think the Olmstedian parks back and play. I think what anything we learned from, I think, recent events of the pandemic is that, you know, this bucolic linear parks, they're so therapeutic for the communities, and the original principles of that type of design that, you know, really rely on the fundamentals, you know, of creating spaces, of creating vistas. It's absolutely applying today. I think what's different from, you know, the times of Olmsted is that, you know, there is new pressure from urban communities to occupy parks in a variety of different ways, not just strolling, not just running, not just sitting, but, you know, bringing your whole family and doing a birthday party, you know, and bringing music and food and, you know, a barbecue pit with you. I don't know. So there is, you know, all of the kind of hybridity and variety that's emerging out of kind of multidimensional, diverse communities that surround the park. I think creating a new character that an identity that's emerging through that new type of use. I think the bones of the park are so great. You know, the grading of it, you know, is really beautiful. It's literally just, you know, how do you adorn it with new opportunities for, you know, the sunny slopes. You know, we're thinking about flowering plants and pollinator gardens. On, you know, in the shady low spots, you know, we're thinking about green infrastructure and how that becomes new opportunities for habitat. I think there is a lot more infusion of this kind of performative, kind of scientific approach that's been trending in parks lately. You know, people are tending to appreciate this, you know, when parks look messy, you know, it doesn't look like a manicured garden. I think people are changing their mind about understanding that that's actual beauty. They learn to live with meadows. They learn to, you know, appreciate that when, you know, meadow is not mowed down, it's actually living and supporting life. So, you know, I would say it's, you know, absolutely, you know, building on that beauty and adding to that character. I think, you know, that loop that we put together, you know, the garden loop that we call, I think it can present, you know, a full range and a variety of garden experiences, you know, and it's almost like a transect from Olmsted. You know, it's like 150-year-old garden transect.
Well, one of the great old tenets of garden design was the borrowed landscape, right? So like
that which you can see
it isn't yours, you can claim as yours, right?
Whether it be a view to downtown or a stroll through
the Olmsted parks that are not part of Freedom Park. And I think that's, you know, again, that goes back to those ideas about the community and how this park embraces its adjacencies as well, and takes those experiences and, you know, see if we can find a symbiotic relationship between the two.
All right, moving on. Leanne wonders if the Conservancy has any sort of general timeline for shorter term improvements, longer range components. Anyone care to speak to that?
It's really part of this master planning process. At the end of it, we will have those kind of ideas about timelines, and when we actually have a list of improvements, we will have a much better idea of how long they will take. But we're planning very much so to begin sort of active pursuit of many of these ideas, all of these ideas, you know, as soon as the master plan is completed. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of fundraising to be done, but we're very, very excited to take that on with the community, with the neighborhoods, and with the citizens of Atlanta, because we really are very ambitious about our, you know, plans for this park. We want this to be one of the best urban parks anywhere. So, and that's why we've hired an incredible consultant to help us with those ideas.
Al asks, what are you doing to identify encroachments on the park and addressing those circumstances?
Natalia could probably speak to this a little better than I could, but
well, we've gone through a very tedious exercise. We looked at every parcel adjoining the park, the history of how, you know, that borderline came about over time. You know, it's a complicated story. We're essentially looking at Georgia Department of Transportation right away. I mean, this is a leftover boundary that was developed for original freeway construction, you know, and so that became a park. Over time, some of the original edges got eroded by encroachment from adjacent neighbors. I mean, there is, like, everywhere you look, you know, there's a different circumstance. So what we've done, we've gone through this process in identifying, you know, researching the history of these properties, identifying what's there now and whether or not, you know, it's even a viable proposition to, you know, to look at something. Well, I mean, there's a driveway there for a private, you know, house. I mean, it's like, it's gone. But in some cases, you know, we identify properties that can be brought into the park and become much better utilized. So what, you know, what you see, what you're looking at now, the red outline on the map is the result of that investigative process that hopefully will, what do you call it, you know, kind of not finalize, but, you know, solidify that borderline of the park, because, you know, it is public land, and, you know, preserving public land for the public is essential. You know, green space is public green space should be for everyone.
I'll just add on to that. On a lot of public projects, small uncertainties about land ownership and so forth can put huge obstacles into sort of realizing what the overarching goals are. And so there's a lot of time and effort that will go into resolving some of these, you know, whether they be you know, or poorly documented ownership lines, boundaries, and so forth. But so sometimes a very small, seemingly small issue can really prohibit realizing some big themes. So and that's pretty universal on any old city and old land, you know, that as they get developed over time. So we'll be very sensitive to that moving forward and try to do our best to identify anything that might fall into that category, so that work can start sooner rather than later.
All right. The next question asks, is there a plan in place being put into place to attract businesses to become more interested in the park and understanding the value of the park? This person mentions that other parks have done well in establishing business partnerships. Any ideas?
yes, we do have a couple of board members that are board directors that are working on a plan now to engage directly around the park with businesses as well as neighbors. So that's in place, and hopefully it will be in place for January.
Thanks, Harriet. Someone asks, or Elizabeth asks, wasn't there a pedestrian bridge at Moreland as part of the original park design back in the day? I believe there was.
There was.
Yeah.
The original park master plan was essentially, it wasn't a master plan the way we think about one in the context of what we're doing today, but it was a plan, a very nice plan that was essentially an illustration and then some text that went along with it that was actually made into sort of a giant poster at some point, but by a landscape architecture firm in Atlanta back then, Edal. And it outlined homesteading principles and a lot of that kind of thing. And there were certain projects, there were lakes and other projects that were unrealized. And one of the suggestions was a bridge over Moreland at the time. And it did get included into that master plan, but it was controversial at the time, as it sort of is today. And I believe it's the only project that has an asterisk by it. And exactly what that asterisk meant, I don't know, other than the fact that it was controversial and not endorsed by everybody. But yeah, there was an element of some kind of bridge over Moreland in the original plan.
The park itself exists because of years of fundraising from individuals and neighborhoods. Why is Freedom Park Conservancy not pursuing those sources?
I think the answer is we are. We are getting more serious about a formal kind of fundraising. And I'm no longer on the board. I was on the board for 10 or 15 years, but you can, I'm sure Harriet can talk about that. But yes, there are definitive plans to engage the community for funding and everything else, support.
I think the Conservancy all agreed that fundraising would be for different projects once we had a qualified and professional cost estimator for some of the projects that came out of the master plan. In our strategic plan, this was one of the main missions that we reached this goal. So hopefully how this comes out is which project we plan on fundraising for. But we just don't know that now and how it will play out towards the end of the year.
Another question, what about enhancing the community gardens? Any thoughts on allowing community chickens and goats?
Seriously.
Yes. Part of our maintenance strategy, right?
That does, you should know about the pig that lives in Ponce Highland named Beef. Then we do have animals that roam the landscape.
I'll make a quick note about community gardens. I mean, I think anybody who's been involved with them, it's really tremendous, and you get an opportunity to like dig into the ground, literally, of public space. And they're complicated, there's other types of, they can be messy and, have their own sort of complexity. So I think like all those things, and when we're talking about these different programming opportunities, if there's a group that was really behind an idea like that, I think that's something that I'm sure the Conservancy would take very seriously. And again, it comes down to also finding an appropriate spot that is appropriate and has good access and those kind of things as well.
And one final question, are there any plans to implement a skate park given the low amount in the Atlanta area?
So this question came up earlier in our earlier session, sort of, a similar type of question. I mean, one thing is we have the skate park that's in the Beltline nearby, and I think, again, like a lot of these adjacencies, maybe it's as much about increasing the connectivity with that, so that feels there's not such a distinct barrier between the two parks.
Yeah, and there was actually a really good comment on the mapping exercise where a neighbor proposed a new linkage that will connect pedestrians down a long ice bridge into the skate park area on the northern side of the park. Mm-hmm. So that currently does not exist. So I think that's as a first step. But kind of skaters don't really draw those lines. It's
Right. Yeah. So there was some other discussions we had about, how to skateboarding. Are there other places or ways you can integrate it into park design? Is there art that involves, things like that? And that's a hot topic, right? There's always this a little bit of tension between that type of activity, which we think is great to see, especially we love seeing multi-generational or just otherwise sort of this usage of the park. But you got to be sensitive to other types of protecting a certain level of investment. If you have a portion of the park that's trying to be more pastoral and quiet, maybe that's not a place where you want to have skaters and so forth. But there's other creative ways to incorporate that. So, we certainly recognize it's a huge part of any sort of community makeup.
And I'd like to just add a little bit to that on the skating as the creative force and energy in the city is something we recognize as well. And we have worked over time with the skate community to develop ideas that it was brought up earlier today, but it was something that we had actually pursued with some of the leading figures that actually were leading members of forming the skate park that exists in 4th Ward. But the idea of skatable art and creating environments like that are not necessarily a skate park, but they're objects, or they, augmenting the path in certain areas that allow for a flow for skaters. There are a lot of ideas, but I think the main thing that we appreciate is that is part of the creative identity of certainly some of the key neighborhoods that make up Freedom Park, and that's been recognized, and we certainly want to honor that. Many of the areas that are eventually developed really were explored through the skating community well before the other groups got their hands on those spaces. Anyway, we appreciate their creative energy.
So thank you so much for the last comment. I did want to mention that if you would like to make additional comments, please contact your neighborhood director or one of the board by emailing masterplaninfo@freedompark.org. We're giving additional time to each one of the neighborhoods, additional time to submit information or talk about ideas. And we will schedule those meetings soon. So thank you very much for coming to this meeting tonight.
Thanks,
have a great
guys.
night.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great
Thanks for
night. Have a great weekend.